Welcome to Peacebuilding Initiatives with José Barzola. Peacebuilding Initiatives are collaborative ways of developing healthy, positive relationships via dialogue, cross-cultural understanding, exploring ways to shift our own perspective to build compassion and empathy within our communities. Thank you for joining us today. On today's episode, we have Steph Salkin, pronouns they, them, who is a consultant specializing in behavioral health grant administration and a Master's of Social Work student at the University of Hawaii Manoa's Thompson School of Social Work and Public Health. Salkin jokes that they have a degree in quote unquote dead white guys from St. John's College, a great books program that chronologically traces through Western thought. Salkin has over a decade of experience in state government, administration within higher education, health sciences, and behavioral health. They identify as a friendly neighborhood bean counter and a virtuous bureaucrat who is a freak in spreadsheets. Salkin embodies intersectionality as a non-binary person with a mixed heritage. Salkin hopes to ground their future practice in Indigiqueer wisdom. Salkin is a stitcher, cross-stitch, embroidery, crochet, and knitting, and scratcher, an amateur tattooist. Salkin is a Sawa to a United States Army veteran, sibling to pieces of their heart walking in three other bodies, and a Tulong to many human and furry nibblings. They feel closest to their ancestors on land sandwiched between the Pacific and hills. Thank you so much, Salkin, for being here with us today. It sounds like you have such a rich and dynamic set of experiences. I love how you combine your work in behavioral health, grant administration with the creative side, especially with stitching and tattooing all at once. The way you describe grounding your future practice in Indigiqueer wisdom is really compelling too. It sounds like you're looking for intersections of identity, culture, and profession that is so important. And with that, I just wanted to turn it over to you. If there were anything you want to share specifically, otherwise I can get started with a couple of questions because I think there's a lot that I look forward to learning from you and that I know our audience will take away from today's conversation as well.
Thank you for having me today. My Discord is going off, sorry. Um, I appreciate this conversation and your voice in general, holding these sorts of spaces. So it's an honor to be here. I will always take a seat at the table when invited when it comes to discussing connection, community, and how queerness can come into that. Let's go.
Thank you. Thank you. And for folks, so this will be available both in the video recording and also audio, but for folks listening to this and aren't seeing you, you have a virtual background that says Same Just Substance Use Disorder Treatment Month. So first, I just wanted to recognize that. And also, if there was anything additional that you wanted to add.
Thank you. Yes, it's a gorgeous watercolor with lovely hues of blue, which is part of Sams's branding, but also I think one that holds the sort of sadness that we have when we think about all of the lives we've lost to opioid and stimulant use disorders, among many others. Those just happen to be what I'm more familiar with in my work. But I think it's always a good chance, a good time to say that recovery is possible. uh, no one is beyond hope, and often hope is the thing that can get people through to their life of recovery. So
Thank
don't
you.
forget.
Thank you for bringing awareness and education, because unfortunately, a lot of these just go unrecognized. And I think, yeah, the more we talk about the issues, the more it becomes part of the norm, and uh, we can speak up as we see things happening. So to get us started a little, you going off of your bio, you said that you have a degree in dead white guys from St. John's College. How has that classical education shaped your current work in social work and behavioral health?
I think I really needed that chronological um, uh, pathway through Western thought. so much of ancient Greek, Roman, Christianity, and then moving on into slightly more modern philosophers, thinkers, scientists, etc. They still underpin our society, the way we think, even if their theories at the time were wrong, they still taught us about how to think. So in that sense, I joke it's just about, dead white guys, but in a very real sense, they're with us in how we apply logic, how we conceive of the world. Still, some of their phraseology lives on. Aside from, even if you're not in academia, there are a lot of ideas that came out of Western thought that persist into modernity. Um, and it was important to me to understand that a lot of Western thought really hinges on binary thinking, white and black, true and false. This is to some degree, a major underpinning of logic in general. But it also to understand that was helpful for me in understanding why we need to move beyond binaries. Uh, I mean, it's essential to have a binary like ones and zeros when you're building a system, but then to apply a binary to the complex system as opposed to just the building pieces is
No, thank you. And I think it also speaks to deeper conversations about colonialism. Uh, and as you stated, Western thought is all around. Part of that is because of the ongoing history of colonialism in this world. So it's always important to just kind of take a step back and have that reflection moment of like, am I doing this because this is intentionally how my ancestors intended this to go, or has it just been unfortunately ingrained in us that, even our ancestors didn't really question it because it's been around for centuries, unfortunately. So thank you. Thank you for, sharing. As a non-binary person with a mixed heritage, how do you navigate the intersectionality of your identity in your professional life and in the communities you serve?
Ooh, I think that being non-binary, it's like the middle child of gender identities and ideologies. You can see from many perspectives, identifying with many perspectives. And in that, it's very easy to be empathetic, to mediate, if you will, coming from multiple perspectives and having that space within oneself to see multiple perspectives, multiple truths potentially in any situation. Um, and then I think that came secondary to my multiculturalism, my, you know, many cultures, having two ethnicities, etc. And I think that having grown up in a very binary world, I felt like I didn't quite fully belong to either one. I think that's a pretty common thing for any of us mixies out in the world. So really grasping on to the idea of being a non-binary person, and really embracing that. Also, very parallel to understanding that I'm never going to be, full-blown Philippine. I'm never going to be full-blown white. I am both at the same time, and so much more. We need to not worry about fitting into these binaries so much. It's very freeing.
Thank you. I think one of the things you alluded to, but didn't say, maybe because you're too kind, and just speaking from my own experience also, it is, yeah, it is this you're living in multiple worlds, in multiple culture, multiple communities, but on the opposite side of it, I've also found it to be, kind of like eye-opening and I would say sometimes you feel like a superhero because you're able to you're like, oh, I understand that other language. There's certain things that just don't translate or interpret well into English. And so there's some things that are lost in the process. And so being able to be part of different communities and being embedded within it, just gives you extra richness, I guess, to life, I would say. And being able to connect with folks, whether even if it's not over the specific language that they speak, whether it's the meal that they grew up with, it just goes so much farther, further than and not to knock peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but if you didn't grow up with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, yeah, so it's just, I, so yeah, so thank you for what you're doing and what you continue to do, though. I just wanted to acknowledge that. Can you talk a little bit more about Indigiqueer wisdom? What does that mean to you, and how you're incorporating that into your social work practice?
Oh, thank you for asking. Okay, full disclosure, I did not know this was a thing until this year. I'm so glad I am here in Hawaii and studying social work. I have amazing teachers, kumus, and professors who are just adding into that richness, so much content. And that came from discussions in my human behavior in the social environment course with Plamach David Nistal. I've been a hat, thank you. Uh, Amazing. If you have a chance to take that course, I highly suggest with him. Anyway, okay, so I think that also the idea of having multiple identities, being that intersectional self, and especially being somebody with lived experience and having mental health issues, anxiety, depression, etc., trying to find a professional who had proficiency dealing with these very common mental health experiences with a mind, with a capacity to address it from the framework of a patient who is queer, who is, trans, and a person with brown skin who has a different way of interacting with the world. Very hard, especially mainland. Yeah. So that's a part of coming into it, that there has to be more representation at those intersections. When you have intersectional folks, it's easy to look into people who aren't intersectional and help them. It's an oversimplification, but when you have the skill set to help people with those intersectional identities and intersectional experiences, it translates. There's no loss there. And I think that that is also a part of the Indigiqueer strength. So there's room for multiple truths. That is part of the indigenous overgeneralization paradigm that we see in social work, that is, very different from dominant paradigms where you see that, we have to acknowledge one truth. It has to be, measurable, quantifiable, and using the same unit or framework in order for it to be admitted as truth. So there's wisdom in many of the indigenous cultures because there's no one. It's not a monolith by any means. And there's also a beauty that I've found in researching, coming to Hawaii and learning about Mahu, knowing more about the history of Bakla, Philippine genders, and looking into the First Nations with Two-Spirit folks. There's a whole list I can't just pull off the top of my head, but many of our First Nations, First Peoples, Indigenous people around the globe had a role, at least one, if not many, where the gender transcended a binary. And it didn't break society by any means. If anything, they were often healers or honored roles and voices within the social fabric. And I think that it does leverage some of that ability to see from multiple perspectives, to tap into those synergies, sympathies, empathies as the situation dictates, or as it comes about naturally, to be able to hold the manifold in one place, in one human being, to reconcile it. And I think there's something very, very loving and self-accepting about that in an individual, but also in a society, to have that role in society where we treasure people who can, come and mediate, see from multiple perspectives, and apply that to our, politics, our relationships, how we apply wisdoms from our elders, etc. I think that there's a flexibility and inclusiveness that is such a beautiful strength that yeah, I think that I just automatically think of it as a wisdom to be able to live that as a person, even if you don't identify as non-binary, if you're not trans. I think it's beautiful when a person is able to hold on to many spaces within themselves and welcome people to do the same, to allow people to come into spaces as they are, and not to feel othered or like you have to fit into a box or a binary in order to interact or be valued.
Thank you so much, and um, thank you for educating and putting a spotlight to even, we talk about this duality, everything's just like either black or white. And even with the word indigenous or queer, we think we're like, oh, we're pushing against the colonialism, but then it's like, oh wait, that's part of it right there. We need to empower and take back and come up with our own language. So thank you for taking a deeper dive into that, and yeah, talking about the importance of modeling, because if folks don't see the good work that can be done, how will they know that it's a possibility? And thank you for also just spotlighting on what's been learned during your time here in Hawaii, because I think there's a lot that a lot of us who are from outside, like myself, I'll speak. Um, you know, yes, I was aware of colonialism, but it was not something that was talked about on like a daily basis. Uh, and I think that's a bit of a disservice and maybe the way it was intended to be. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and as we go into some other terminology, you identify as a friendly neighborhood bean counter. So, might you share a little bit about what that means, as well as what's your approach to often intimidating world of grant administration and how you make it more accessible?
Yes. Okay. So just like trans, bakla, I want to reclaim bean counter. So in my professional life, I was taking that, negative connotation phrasing, and trying to bring it, demystify it, put a human face to it and say, I am your friendly neighborhood being counter, which is to acknowledge that I was a bureaucrat, right? Working for the state for so many years, and being an administrator, you have to be a gatekeeper. That is part of the role, right? That's part of the fiduciary responsibility to be a good steward of public funds. One has to follow rules, and be transparent. And in that, there's strict adherence to a buttload of federal code, state regulations, agency rulemaking, etc., which daunting. Even people with a gajillion postnominal credentials will clench when they hear that the the state is coming to audit, or like they have to submit a 20-page application for funding. So all of it can be very daunting, intimidating, and even if you get past that after working in it for a while, it's exhausting. So yeah, again, providing a warm face, working for the man, not the man myself. But also it was actually a lot of fun to be in that role as a pass-through entity. So taking funding from SAMHSA, who does a lot of substance abuse, mental health services administration for those who aren't with it. They are a huge administration working with Health and Human Services, and they put a lot of money from the federal into states to help address things. So at the time, and most recently, I was working to address opioid and stimulant use disorders and misuse. And a lot of money went into that with the opioid response funds. A lot of technicalities and such. So taking a breath, knowing that ultimately the point is to help people, save lives, reduce risk, make treatment available to folks and help people get on their recovery journey. So really it is, I like to say, like slashing through red tape with a machete was also part of my pastime, which means taking a lot of the legalese and the regulations, etc., breaking it down so that a layperson can understand it. I think part of being a virtuous bureaucrat is making it as accessible to folks as possible. I also characterize it as having that like easy button, making it as easy and accessible for folks to do the good work that they want to do. So yeah, specifically, since I do love spreadsheets, I'm that kind of neurodivergent. I will make a spreadsheet for anything. As a single person, yes, I had a spreadsheet for rating dates and relationship compatibility. So spreadsheets for everything. But it's not for the sake of the spreadsheet. Really, when we are serving people, when we are managing programs, managing public funds, the end of the spreadsheet is to provide transparency, record keeping, so that we can assure our constituents that we're above board and trying our best to help them within the system that we have that is clunky. But so often that means being available to explain things to people, to answer questions, to be able to test back and forth. Also visualizing. Not everybody wants a spreadsheet. So, I will put out a pie chart. I will graph things. Also, quick tip, leadership loves that. If you want government that's based on data-driven decision making, then it's really important for those people on the front lines and mezzo, administration, to be able to distill all of that data, all of that great work you're doing, take those clunky spreadsheets that are too many tabs, and make a really gorgeous sort of report. Give them a graph. If it's a dashboard, oh my gosh, they will love you for it. But it's also a manifold, right? It doesn't have to be for just one audience. I love being able to report out not just outcomes, but uh, the stories, the human histories, the impacts that we're having. It's for leadership, but it's also for those we're serving to say, like, you entrusted us with this money. This is what we're doing with it. And also, part of being a virtuous bureaucrat is to always be thinking about that full circle of communication and what do we need to do better? Always, always be asking, what do we do better next time? This is a work in progress, always. Government will never be perfect. I'm not often comfortable with, absolute language, but government will never be perfect. So that's why it's important for us to test, to innovate, and to communicate with everybody as kindly as possible. And sometimes that means give me a white paper, give me a one pager.
Thank you. Well, thank you for all those strategies for folks who are listening to as they want to impress or get to the next stage. Yeah, you speak to this world of code switching, really, and how we do it in so many different and many of us just it's second nature, depending upon the circles, the communities that we're in. Will whether it's the way we speak, the way our nonverbals go, the way we dress. Unfortunately, because we live in a society that is not ready to take one as their full self. Uh, Hopefully, we're hopeful for the future, but not at the moment. But so you talked a little about your experience in government administration. What are some common challenges you see in the intersection of behavioral health and public policy?
Beautiful question. And I think I want to pull on and pull the thread of, the world may not be ready from what you were just saying. That's always going to be the case. Like I said, government is never going to be perfect. It's always going to need work. And that's because it's made by humans. We are, by nature, very malleable. We change, our needs change, especially when you take us as a big organization, a big group. So the world is never gonna be perfect either. And as much as that can be depressing and demotivating, been there years. I do want to say that I still have hope that we can create spaces for ourselves. It's not always comfortable. But I think that's something that we need to keep in mind at the intersection of behavioral health, government, especially in the time we're in. Um, Even if our language is being censored, even if my being as I am, my truth is being erased actively and my rights uh, legislated away. Uh, there is space for me. I deserve that space. I am ancestor made, and they can't take that beauty and that gorgeousness and that richness away from me. I hope that people come to feel the same way. Um, it's hard to stay in those spaces. Um, but I think we still need to persevere. Part
Thank
of
you.
my personal mission is to stay visible, to stay myself. My queer brown self will be out there, and to show that there is, queer brown excellence as well. Like my dashboards and my spreadsheets speak for themselves. Um, so yeah, I think that we have to approach those intersections where systems are broken. Let's just be honest, right? Behavioral health systems have been broken. They were built with, disparate funding, disparate rules, etc. It wasn't a cohesive system. We're trying to put all of these pieces together and make it work. And it's not as simple as the Brady Bunch, right? It's not that clean cut. Um, but we can't approach it with the same idea of top down or bottom up. I'm a real big fan of universal design in terms of systems and administration. If we design for the folks who are having the hardest time accessing it, um, then it'll be that much easier to help everyone else. If if I have the skill set to help someone like myself with intersectional identities, it's that much easier to help everyone else. It doesn't take away from the general population or those in dominant places of position, if you will. So I don't know. I hope that that speaks to folks in whatever place they find themselves. It's not just applicable to big broken government. I think it goes to so many things: architecture, literature, business, anything where humans are involved. If we look out for all of our siblings, even the people who are, maybe 2% of the population, it doesn't take away as much as people might fear from everybody else who isn't part of that 2%.
No, thank you. Thank you for your optimism, for sharing so openly. It's just yeah, I mean, as the saying goes, what is it? One's existence is resistance, basically. Um, but that is, I look at history, and there have been challenging times in history as we look back, and it's fascinating how, thinking back to like high school, you learn about US history, and somehow they condense it all into like a history book, and you're like, wait, it just became a paragraph, or it just became maybe a chapter. Uh, and so it makes me ponder, like, fast forward, I don't know, 100, 200 years. Is this time that we may see as challenging going to be perceived as like, is it going to just be a paragraph? Is it going to be deemed enough to be a chapter in a history book? I don't know. Perspective once more, how do things evolve? Uh, but yeah, it's yeah, going back to modeling, you never know who's out there observing. Uh, and you have to keep that optimism alive, just because I think what I've learned through history is that in challenging times, it is the community coming together that's truly where, um, folks can find brave spaces to uh, be themselves. It's goes back to just the basics of, neighbors sharing, you know, some sugar, some eggs, coming together for music, for gatherings, taking care of each other. It's yeah, there's unfortunately sometimes a big disconnect between the larger government and then the community itself. And I've done some work with, and I've spoken this previously about, with, as it relates to World War II, and yes, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Yes, the US dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And since we're heading to the 80th anniversary, but as I've met Hibakusha, atomic bomb survivors, and also met Pearl Harbor survivors, uh, and spoken to them, many of them just, they were not entailed in those government decisions, or they were just happy living their lives. They weren't really concerned about, like, oh, we need some extra land for our country, the borders issue. So unfortunately, there tends to be this trend of a disconnect between what the people want and what leadership is doing. I'm hopeful that one day it'll come closer together. There'll be better communication, but yeah, all in due time. But um, getting back a little to how you approach integrating behavioral health frameworks, possibly into systems that may not have a behavioral health focus, like higher education or health sciences. I don't know if you have any tidbits on that.
Um, Over my career, I would say there have already been inroads, especially post-COVID. I see a lot more awareness for healthcare professionals, uh, mental health. There's more acknowledgement in general about the level of compassion fatigue, burnout, um, those sorts of things that indicate there hasn't been enough emphasis on behavioral health. So I'm glad to see that. Still not enough. You've mentioned modeling. I think one of the things I'm also grateful for with my educators and mentors are people modeling what it means to take care of oneself, not just a face mask, sometimes that's really good communication about where we are at any time, acknowledging our positioning, and creating realistic expectations for folks, given how many spoons we have, what we're dealing with. So yeah, in an ideal world, I would love to see a system that had really flexible PTO policies that really allows parity in practice between having need of a mental health day, just as we do having a cold. It should be that shameless and easy to take time for ourselves and our well-being. Or also, I keep talking about mental health, but also with substance use. Still very stigmatized. Both facets of behavioral health are so stigmatized. So on one hand, I think being visible as somebody with lived experience with be it mental health or substance use goes a long way to fighting that stigma, especially as a high performing professional. I tip my hat to all of those who come with their lived experience. I have a lot of great mentors and inspirations in Colorado, where I come from, of people who live that truth, model it, and then reach back to help other people in their recovery, in their professional lives as well. What does that look like to be honest with one's employer? Like, hi, this was a really tough day. It's bringing up triggers for, this trauma or, some of my use in the past. And these are what I need as reasonable accommodations. Or, maybe I just need you to be aware that I'm struggling today. So you can just, maybe that report won't be on your desk at 4 p.m., but it will get to you. So those are like very soft suggestions. Again, PTO flexibility and letting that be show parity between physical and mental health, I think is a no-brainer. Um, that's one thing that I think supervisors and leaders can probably implement without major um, policy or financial differences. It's a cultural difference. It really is about how you make that available and offer it to employees and students in academia, etc. Um, and I think that those ideas of self-care and clear communication and self-knowledge, to being able to call out as a person, like, this is where I am and this is what I need, coming and bringing that from behavioral health to any other system. I think, my business mind anticipates people wondering about what sort of impacts that would have on bottom line. And I don't have the research in front of me, but I know that when we allow people to take that sick day when they're starting to feel a cold and tell them don't come into the office and spread it to everyone, the business does better. So I would also say that mental health and wellness, not just health, but wellness, is also transmissible. It's potentially part of culture but also like training people and allowing them to take care of themselves so that they're not getting burnt out, so that you're not reassigning work to the rest of the team when you lose somebody because they're burnt out and they need to find better work-life balance. It could be better studied, I would say, in my opinion, but yeah, I think those are sort of universal things that just take a little emotional intelligence and some internal work for anybody in a leadership position.
Thank you. I think you hit it right at the very end, that emotional intelligence. And till this day, I still meet folks who, most folks know what IQ, intelligence, tests are, but very few people know about EQ. Uh, and yeah, it can make such a big difference. Sometimes I would think that's a little bit more, I don't want to say important, but it can be, especially if you have, in a leadership role, you're interacting with folks or you have folks reporting to you. Which I would like to think if you're in a leadership role, you'd always have that. I can't think of a leader that wouldn't have. Does that negate the fact of being a leader if there's no one reporting to them? I don't know. That's a more existential question, maybe about like,
I
yeah, go
would
ahead.
push back on that all day long. Okay, so when I started in government, I started as an administrative assistant with the College of Nursing, right? Within academia, that's pretty much the lowest rung for staff that you can be. And I was a leader at that point. Um, not because I had people underneath me, not because I could tell anyone what to do, but because I genuinely cared about my coworkers' well-being, and would work to help their work go as far as it could by facilitating their best work. I think that sort of collectivist and generous attitude, no matter what role you are in within an organization, we can lead, we can model. And I think that that was a huge part of my success is mentoring my superiors in a sense,
Yeah, thank you.
supporting
It,
them in
I
all the ways.
I would actually agree with you that actually I don't think you need, I would say you were a leader in that position. I don't think, one, going back to my earlier conversation, I don't think you need to have anyone reporting to you to be a leader. And I think it's more about, once more, we talk about shifting the perspective of how you can make an impact. I think if you can look at ways that you can make an impact, that's leadership right there, as opposed to some folks assume that, oh, because you are, let's say, the head of an office, or then you're in the leadership role. But as we've known time and time, there are folks that just because they're in charge doesn't mean they're the best leader out there. They just happen to have that position. So, no, thank you. Thank you for that wonderful reminder of how we can make impacts in so many different ways. Um,
Absolutely. And I would just like to, reframe a little bit. Having worked in academia and with so many people, again, with post-nominal credentials out the wahoo, wearing all the hats, mother, researcher, instructor, practitioner, etc. Um, having those letters behind your name do not ensure by any means that you've been trained on how to be a leader of people of an organization, especially on the business side. Like, I think that was also a part of the niche that I found. Many healthcare providers are highly trained, highly specialized. It's very rare for them to have a lot of the intersection with business, office management, etc. Like really you kind of want them to be separate when they're practitioners, right? They're going to treat everybody the same regardless of their ability to pay theoretically. But on the administrative side, you have to have a mind for that. And now they have degree programs for that. But historically, a lot of leadership, it really is really just, you know, getting promoted until you have paste your skill set. And so I try to approach that with empathy. We are all trainable, but also it's on them if they're willing to learn or not. Uh, just put that out there too. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
that. That was
Thank you
very
so
obvious.
much. No, I love it. Thank you. Um, Going back to something from your bio, you mentioned being Tulong. Could you provide a little more, educate us, I guess, insight into what that means to you specifically?
Yes. Okay. Rewinding. A few years while I was going through the paperwork process for changing my legal name, changing my gender marker. Yay, Colorado, giving me the option to be legally acknowledged as a non-binary person. Got the little X on my driver's license. As I was going through that, my family was very supportive. My siblings were like, hey, what do you want the kids to call you now? And so I dug into it. I was like, oh, I'll just borrow some Filipino or something, you know. No, it was actually gendered because of the Spanish occupation. You know, a lot of that Romance language, gendered, etc., had seeped into it, even though our Austronesian roots, they're gender neutral pronouns and such, but the familial roles, there I couldn't find really a gender neutral term that really fit. So I picked my own. I found a term in Tagalog. Tulong means help, aid, you know. So I picked that. I intentionally stayed away from a title, a helper, you know. It's not a role. It is, you know, um that act. I want it to be an act, not something to be taken for granted. I know this conceited, but this is my intent toward these children, these nibblings, which are niece and nephew. It's my the gender neutral inclusive nibblings. They're all just nibblings um collectively, but yeah, so I picked that word and I proposed it to my siblings as what they could call me. And then I was like, okay, it might be a little hard. Even these adults are having a hard time with the tulong. Like where do I put the emphasis? So like let me make it easy. We can just do like, you know, mama, dada, tutu. We'll just, you know, do a repetitive. Filipinos love that. Yeah, and then, you know, a year or so later come out to Hawaii and hear, you know, a song on the radio about tutu. I was like, oh snap, I did not mean to take that, but I'm very happy that it is like a grandparent. It is a sort of, you know, familiar role in Olelo, Hawaii. But yeah, it kind of ages me a little bit, but I'm fine with that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Um, and I love that story of just like it just reminds me of, we constantly talk about like what do we want to be when we grow up, right? But rarely do we question like this name we're given, this identity that is kind of thrown upon us when we're born. So being able to reclaim that, I think that's really beautiful. As uh, from a parent perspective, I remember when we had to like pick a name for my first daughter, I was like, it's a bit of like, oh, I gotta like pick something that's supposed to this person's gonna carry. I mean, obviously, yeah, they can change their name down the road, but like initially, like they're gonna have to like, and so yeah, just trying to find something that's meaningful, I guess, connected to the ancestors, and so yeah, and you did exactly that. You in changing your name, you've connected even further. So thank you for um, showing the way, but modeling in so many different ways. What advice would you give to young people who want to pursue social work, behavioral health, or even public policy, especially those from marginalized or intersectional identities?
Okay, so first of all, getting into helping professions can actually be very healing. Right now, getting into social work, um, we're dealing with a lot of difficult themes, experiences, harmful histories of how policies have been put in place to exclude whole populations. So I would say that it can be healing in naming, acknowledging, learning those histories so that it's not this invisible hand that we experience as individuals, um, which is an economic reference. But anyway, um, so understanding these things can be very healing. It can be challenging too to face a lot of these themes. So I would say that you really need to bring your A game when it comes to working on yourself. Um, you know, uh, you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have it healed right away, but definitely work on those tools of how to stay connected, stay grounded, stay in touch with yourself while dealing with difficult things so that you can learn how to thicken the skin while still having a heart open. I think that's incredibly important. Even from the macro side, as we say in social work, working in administration, um, it's not day-to-day direct care with people, but you're still dealing with systems that were designed to exclude people and empower others. There is a trauma in having to deal with that as well. So you still need to have that ability to take care of oneself. And it's not selfish because toward the end, you are helping others. Even if it's not in a session with an individual, sometimes a spreadsheet can save lives as well. So hang in there. You know, if you get burnt out in direct care, you can always go to administration, do some self-care plans and spreadsheets, and make system-wide differences. But anyway, be yourself, unapologetic, radically, just revolutionarily yourself. Spaces are not ready for us. They're trying to differing degrees. Some of them are not trying, let's be honest. Some of them will say they're trying and, you know, do that really lame romantic partner thing of like, give me one more chance, baby. I don't want to hurt you. Come back. I'll be the best. Anyway, regardless, it's important for us to show up and take those seats at every table that we can, and to persist, to keep going, and to hold on to our joy because our pride, our identity, our joy, our history, those are things they can't take away from us. So let them live rent free in your space for too long. I know that's impossible to do completely, but yes, be yourself, show up, be willing to say that I may be the only person in this room with this experience, but as a brown person, I would not feel comfortable in that situation. You need to change how we approach this, etc. And it it doesn't have to be confrontational. Honestly, I've had a lot of people thank me for bringing these sorts of ideas into different rooms because otherwise they would have no idea.
Thank
There's
you.
so much to say.
No, no,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you. No, th those are some great advice, and I'm hoping folks take some good lessons from your words of wisdom. I'm just kind of getting close to wrapping things up because I could keep talking to you for hours, but I want to be respectful to folks who come in for within the hour. So, I guess turning a little bit to as you continue your MSW studies and your work, where do you see yourself in, 5 years? Kind of impact you hope to have made both the public health field, the communities you work with? And you don't have to be a 5 year planner, just throwing it out there. But
Okay.
you talked about spreadsheets, so that's why I was like, maybe yeah, maybe
Yeah.
there's more than a 5 year plan.
Laughing at myself. I am totally that person who has the 5 and the 10 and etc. So yes, I plan to go back to Colorado and take the lessons I've learned in Hawaii, and the kupuna and the kumus who have been so gracious and generous with their ike. I want to take all of that back and help other people feel as welcomed, inspire and create spaces where people feel belonging. I think that that's one of the beautiful things about coming here. I would not have had the same experience in Colorado, and I think I want to take it back, and help others experience it who do not have the means to come out here, put their life on pause, and come learn from uh, the amazing culture nation we're in right now. Um, so yeah, okay, I'm getting into the nitty gritty. I hope to do a 0.6 FTE of some sort of project administration, zero point 0.4 FTE potentially of mobile health, hopefully taking services to people in rural areas in Colorado with culturally responsive, trauma-informed, wraparound services that'll come to people, even if you live up in the mountains and you don't have internet. That's what I'm talking about. So yeah, like many things in life, I don't want to choose. I want a little bit of both, right? Um, the first few years, I'm not going to make any money. I'm going to be unlicensed, but within 5 years, I should be a licensed clinical social worker, able to bill under my own name, etc., and take it to the streets, if you will. Yeah, so that's part of it, but I hope that in the meantime, I'll be able to find more spaces where uh, I can create that deep trust and the belonging with folks. That's the ultimate goal.
Thank you. Thank you. That's beautiful. I continue to do the really good work, the community building, uh, wherever that may take you. And yeah, so last kind of question here. You've kind of alluded to some of this, but just I want to give you the floor as far as like what do you hope listeners take away from this conversation, whether it's particularly around the importance of intersectionality, cultural humility, and behavioral health, social work. Just
I think right now I want people to be able to check in with their bodies. You may be feeling a lot. Um, but I hope you know it's at least very comforting to me to know that I have my ancestors in my bones, in my flesh, in my DNA. And even though the settler colonial project has been sort of interfering with it for a few hundred years, we have had our own wisdoms for millennia before that. So um, we will keep evolving, we will keep having to adapt to our world. But don't forget that at the base of it, you're incredibly beautifully human and ancestor made. Um, and as my Baba talk told me, even if you don't know your ancestors' names, they know you. They're waiting for you. And even if you think about that in a biological sense, like it's in your DNA. You literally got your building blocks from these people who were very accustomed to specific lands, to specific stressors and diets, etc. But know that you have that wisdom in you. You have what it takes to persevere and to get through so much. So listen to that. Know that you have so much strength in you, and it's okay to not be okay. We've been not okay for a while, and we are still strong, beautiful people. So be kind to yourself and others. I guess that's a good one.
thank you. Thank you so much. You said it best, basically. And uh, it reminds me anytime I'm personally challenged with like, and being like, oh, this is new territory. This is it's about perspective. I'm like, my ancestors figured this out. Not this specific situation, but life was a lot more complicated back then. There wasn't that readily information if I can just look something up. There wasn't, they were farmers, they were miners, like they were involved in fields that I know I am not trained or probably even if I was that I could survive in today. So my hat's off to them and yeah, I thank you for clearing the way for to be able to do what I'm doing and so thank you for clearing the way for the community and uplifting voices and the continuous just the passionate work that you continue to do. Thank you, Salkin, for your time today. I greatly appreciate you. And I have a feeling we're going to have another conversation sometime soon.
Thank you,
Ta-
Jose. Appreciate you.
Yes. Take good care.
You too.